3, 2, 1.
Here we go! Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Metaverse Church podcast. As I mentioned in a previous episode, I'm really putting a lot of focus on this season, just having conversations with people who are doing metaverse ministry. But more importantly, I mentioned really 5 different areas where the church can take advantage of VR, AR, metaverse technology in order to enhance what it is that they're doing and in order to reach the lost people like never before. And so one of those areas that I talked about in the previous episode was how it can raise the temperature of evangelism within the local community, just because people are taking next steps in their spiritual journey. And what I mean by that is there are some people who will be wallflowers. They feel uncomfortable getting into evangelistic type conversations, and I'll just sit there and let other people do it. And what I've seen is that those who tend to be wallflowers that don't necessarily want to get into the game, because they're seeing it modeled and practiced in front of them in VR spaces, they're actually starting to feel more comfortable stepping into those conversations because they are seeing how to handle conversations like that. So one of the people who has spoken to me a lot about where they're seeing this is Nathan from Fox River VR. Nathan is no stranger to the Metaverse Church podcast. So I reached out to Nathan and just said, hey, I want to talk about evangelistic practices and people taking next steps within VR. Do you have a story about it? And he said, absolutely, I do. And I said, then let's hop on to the podcast together and let's talk about it. So today's conversation is with Nathan from Fox River VR, just talking about evangelism within VR. So here we go. Today, we're bringing back one of our guests from last season, Nathan from FRVR. And he and I were chit-chatting not too long ago about just one thing that they're seeing for their people, their volunteers at FRVR in the metaverse that I've also been seeing as well, that I think is super important for the local church when it comes to even that importance of having a metaverse expression. So we're going to be talking all about evangelism and how that plays out not only in the metaverse, but how that's also going to be playing out for in real life conversations as well. So Nathan, you're back.
Hey.
You're our first 2-timer. I mean, we had John from OCC, but our conversation was so long that I created it into 2 parts. But you are our first returning guest to this podcast. So welcome back, man.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stuart. Looking forward to it.
So, dude, I mean, the last time that we talked, I mean, we were talking about just even transitions that were going on in metaverse spaces, every church looking to hop out of alt space since it was shutting down, what FRVR was doing, how you guys got into it. Before we dive into our conversation today, let's even catch our listeners up on that. Who is FRVR and where are you guys doing metaverse ministry these days?
So FRVR, just simply Fox River VR. And once alt space closed down, we did scramble like everybody. And where we've landed right now primarily has been big screen VR. And then we're also now in Horizon Worlds. But big screen VR is where we feel that our niche is. Right now, we meet at 10 p.m. Central Time, so it's a little bit later here for us. We get sometimes there's nights I get done. It's the next morning. Tuesday mornings can be a little rough at work, but we meet at 10 p.m. because that's when people are there, and and we fill up our room, which it's really cool. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about this, but it's been really cool in big screen. So that's what we're doing right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So to speak to me on Horizon, because I know really in the previous season, Goose with Cornerstone, they started really dabbling into Horizon with the alt space shutdown. But what are you guys seeing over there and how's that going for you?
So Horizon has, again, we've been doing this now for about 2 months. And so we're still ramping things up. A couple of neat things. And the reasons we went to Horizons is, the different platforms, as you're aware, but maybe not everybody that's listening may experience this. Different platforms have different levels of comfortability for certain people. And that's all kind of around the number of trolls. In big screen, it's not uncommon for us to have to kick people out of a room, people coming in, F-bombs, things like that. Whereas Horizons allows those that are looking for a little bit more of a comfortable, I can dig a little deeper into scripture, because Meta, who owns Horizon Worlds, they monitor it and keep a lot of that craziness out of there. Now, there's definitely benefits to both worlds, though. One thing we're finding in Meta is that it's a great platform for our small group conversations, for people that we've gotten to know a little bit better, and now we can spend some more time pouring into them, and without having to worry is who's going to be jumping into the room. Whereas where we're in big screen, we love that environment where there's new people every single week. We get to share the gospel new with somebody every single week, Stuart. It's incredible.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. I keep getting asked questions about Horizon, and I tell them, like, I haven't dabbled in it yet. Like, I've gone in, I've played around, I've even tried my hand at world building. I know that there's tons of great ministry opportunity in those spaces, so I'm looking forward to hopping in. But I'm with you. Whether it's with Lakeland or, as you know, not a lot of people know, but I've launched another church in Big Stream called Vector. Like, there's just a lot of great opportunity there. The room capacity isn't nearly as large as what you're going to find on some of the other platforms. But dude, sometimes people are just coming in there and they're super hungry. And sometimes like with really with Vector, I'm seeing some familiar faces because I'm doing it more at that 8 p.m. time frame. But I have a lot of returning people. But even with Lakeland, when we do it at 9 a.m., like, we get some returning people, but we just get people who are coming in and they're hungry to learn. Like, they're bringing in their questions or whatnot, which really gets us to the heartbeat of our conversation today, which is like, in the last episode, I was talking about how really we're seeing this shift from like moving away from VR technology. Like, a lot of these companies that were kind of going all in on VR technology are kind of scaling back on some of their VR resources, if you will, or the resources for their VR arm. And that's really causing a lot of churches to go, well, see, this is a dying technology. Like, there's really no place for us in this. It's here today, gone tomorrow. But I'm pushing back against that. I think especially with the launch of the Apple Vision Pro, which is still yet to be seen what that has to offer for ministry purposes, which I'm assuming is going to be a lot. But I mean, in the first 15 minutes, they sold over $300 million of product, 80,000 units. Had somebody sent me an article the other day that told me that they're up to 200,000 units being sold, which they were like, it seems like a slowdown, but we have to remember, the early consumers are going to be the ones that test the market, and then you'll see another uptick in sales because you'll start getting the hands-on experience reviews coming in and whatnot. So I don't think that the VR technology as a whole is dying. I think that it's a wave that might be crashing, but what we know about waves is they keep coming, and sometimes they come back bigger and stronger than the previous one. And I think that that's what we're about to see, which is even more of a reason why I feel like the church needs to be stepping into VR and metaverse technology. But again, the heartbeat for this is I want to focus on just one of those areas why I feel like it's important for the church to be stepping in on this. And it's really what you and I are both seeing, and it has to do with evangelism within VR. And it's not so much just the evangelistic nature that VR provides for the church to reach the lost, because again, you're talking about like 98% of the people that are using VR want nothing to do with Jesus, or they've never heard of Jesus. But what I more importantly want to talk about is how VR is helping the volunteers at FRVR range or upgrade or raise their temperature for evangelism. Because what I hear from you and what I'm seeing is it almost seems like VR is a really good assimilation to how to have these difficult conversations with people who don't necessarily believe what we believe in, but then how that's pouring out of VR and into IRL in real life. So speak into it, Nathan. What are you guys seeing over there at FRVR?
Well, let me first start with my own personal experience in VR. Um, One thing that I've noticed, again, picture when you're in VR, you're in an avatar, they're in an avatar, so that gives you just a little bit of a different interaction than if you're standing right in front of somebody. On their end, they've got this little bit of an anonymity, even though they make their avatar try to look as much like themselves. Usually, they've got this little bit of an anonymity, and there's a comfort level there. And because of that comfort level, they're willing to share. They're willing to speak up. We've seen this in some of our volunteers. We've got a few volunteers that are autistic, and it's amazing to see them just blossom in VR because they have that a little bit of a protective shell, but that means that they can actually open up more. I know it almost sounds counterintuitive that you have this barrier, but it allows you to open up more. And then for me, it's been given me the opportunity to be bolder even in my faith and to share the gospel. I talked to you about how we share the gospel at 10 o'clock on Monday nights. Uh, it's rare now that we go a week without directly sharing the gospel with somebody. Whereas I'll be honest, even as a pastor, before we got into VR, it could be months, between the opportunities to share the gospel with somebody. And so it's been really neat to see some of our volunteers step up and get into the leadership positions. We've got, like I mentioned, we've got somebody with autism that's in our leadership position. We just love the fact that he can open up and he feels comfortable, and he's been able to use some of the gifts and the skills that God's given him to write material for our group, to pray with people in our group. Another example of a leader, she's actually one of our key leaders at FRVR. Her name's Christina. Christina has had the opportunity to lead our groups. We call them events, really, because it's kind of a mix between a church service and an interactive, more small group feel. She's had the opportunity to step into a leadership position, and I've been able to see her grow in that ability to handle difficult questions, to deal with people that you wouldn't normally run into coming into a church. Just a quick example of that. 2 weeks ago, our event on Monday night was on transgenderism. And what does Scripture say about that? What does God say about that? And in big screen, you get a room of about 15 people. It actually caps at 15 people. But that room was so very diverse. We had everything from pastors to we had one headset, one avatar, let me say, where his sister was so engaged in the conversation that she wanted to put the headset on, and she got engaged in the conversation.
Wow.
And was very pro transgender. So that interaction and the way Christina handled it was incredible. I'll have to say I wouldn't. There's 98 out of 100 pastors, myself included, wouldn't have handled that room as well as she did. So it's just been so neat to see our volunteers grow in their discipleship and their evangelism capabilities in VR.
Yeah. Now, would Christina have done that prior to a year, 2 years of being in virtual reality? Would you say that she probably would have done that and
Nope.
handled the conversation the same?
Nope. Not at all.
So it's all because
No.
she's been spending time with these people in virtual reality and having conversations with those who are opposed to the gospel.
And what's so neat with Christina is she's also a leader in one of our it's called Mom Time, one of our in-person, real life mothers, with kids. And it's neat to see how she's been able to use what she's learned in VR to help lead those moms in our Mom Time that meets on Wednesdays. So.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. I remember there was almost 10 years ago at this point, my wife and I went to a church planning assessment to go be assessed to be church planners.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that they ask on the questionnaire going into it was, when was the last time that you led somebody to Jesus? And what's very fascinating, I've had this conversation with a few other church planners at this point, is most church planners are coming from established churches, right? So the opportunity for us to share Jesus is still high. especially with new visitors that come into an IRL church. But at the same time, I sat there and thought about it. It's like, man, the majority of my conversations are actually with people who are already followers of Jesus.
Mhm.
And they're more discipleship conversations than they are evangelistic conversations at this point. Like the actual outreach part of Stuart getting into full-time ministry almost went to the wayside, even though it was still a part of who I am and like a burning passion inside me of like, dude, let's reach the lost, let's reach the lost. But I found myself answering that question going, man, when was the last time I had a real like gospel evangelistic conversation with somebody? And so I got the opportunity to actually fill out an assessment like that recently. And I told my wife when I came to that question, I was like, man, I remember when I filled something like this out 10 years ago, I was like, maybe 4 or 5 of those conversations within the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, which sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
But at this time, I was like, probably 10 a week, to be honest with you, if not more, that I'm having conversations like that, like introducing people to Jesus, maybe for the very first time, or having come back to Jesus moments with some people. And it's really just what VR provides us, just because that's the environment that we're going into. We are people who are salt and light going into tasteless, dark places and saying, hey, we got something that you might be interested in. I know that you're coming here cussing me out and everything, but if you entertain me for about an hour, maybe just maybe, or if you'll just want to get into a conversation with me, maybe just maybe. But it was because of that, like I started to notice this back in the alt space days with my team, that when we first got started, like some of them came in with the simple ask of like, hey, you're a really great greeter in real life. Like you make people who step onto this property feel known and seen, even if it's their first time. It's like, I would really love to have you on my team for VR and for you to bring that same mentality and personality into those spaces, because it's a lot easier for somebody to just pop in and pop out without feeling seen. And so we were super intentional of just having people right at like our spawn in point. So nobody could just pop in and just be like, I don't like what I see here and just leave. Like it was, you pop in, and I had team members who are like, hey bud, it's good to see you. Welcome in, virtual high five, all that kind of stuff. But some of them weren't very comfortable having, theological, doctrinal, or evangelical conversations with people. And some people would come into our environment, and they still do in big screen today, coming in being very confrontational right off the bat. And they do so almost passive aggressively by bringing in their questions that they've always been sitting on. But what I started to notice was, as time went on, my team members who kind of took the backseat to those conversations and were like wallflowers to those conversations, all of a sudden I started to notice that some of them were, well, actually, I've got something to say on this. So can I interject? I'm like, take it away. And as time went on, I even saw more of them just go, actually, I would love to handle this. Can I take this one? I'm like, please, by all means.
Yeah.
And I think for me, as we talk about why in this season, why churches should even be pushing further into the idea and adopting VR technology for their church, is like, if the simple reason why is just it creates another avenue for you to get your message out and bring your DNA into a space like VR, great. As long as you're preaching the gospel, I don't care. Like, come in, do it. If it's another avenue for you to reach a lost, I'm all for that. I think that's the great, easy first step in. But I'm getting to a point now, Nathan, where I'm like, almost every church should have this. Like, they need to have it because of the implications of how it's going to impact your local community. Because your people, maybe for the very first time, are going to learn what it means to handle the hard questions. And there's the safety and the anonymity that you were talking about, right? Like, because there is this avatar, there is this screen between us. You don't see my face, I don't see yours. It's easy even for our people to sit there and go, I can't handle this one. And then they can just go silent, or they can just be the wallflowers. But just by being in those environments, it's also easy for them to see it modeled, which is what discipleship is, right? It's like, as Paul would say, follow me as I follow
Yep.
Christ. Like they're seeing it modeled. So then when it happens in real life with their family member, their coworker, their neighbor, their kids, sporting friends, parents, whatever, it becomes a lot. I'm seeing this. I'm seeing them have a much easier time having those faith-based conversations with people because they're going, actually, I just addressed this in virtual reality.
Yep.
And so we were talking about this even prior to hopping on the call, that when it comes to local impact for your church, because that's what every, brick and mortar in real life church wants to accomplish, is they want to accomplish making Jesus known in their local environment and bringing the gospel into Fox River, into Lake Geneva, into Albuquerque, New Mexico, Colorado Springs, whatever. They want to bring the good news into that area and see it won over for Jesus. But if we aren't helping our people learn how to have those spiritual conversations with people, it's almost impossible to win over those local geographical locations. But in VR, people are learning to do it in order to win over the geographical locations. Go for it, man.
And Stuart, one thing that we found, I know you've seen this. In fact, I've seen this growth in both of us, but also in our volunteers, is that our experience and in fact, our tool set, if you will, for how to share the gospel was fairly narrow prior to VR, because the people that I would run into, even when I was sharing the gospel, the people that I would run into were Wisconsinites. Oftentimes they're even in a certain age range. Now we've had the opportunity to share with people from Iran, people from the UK, all over the country, and people from all different backgrounds. Usually, the people that walk into a church are there. They're either already Christian or they're already interested. But to be able to broaden our ability, I've seen you handle, some objections from people that come in there and they're just flat out trying to embarrass you. And I've seen the way that you've handled those objections. You don't let it affect you, but that's a skill that you've learned. I'll tell you what. When I first went into big screen last year, we did a run in big screen. This is while we were still in alt space. We did a run in big screen for about 3 months, and I finally took the headset off and said, I can't do this anymore, because it was like traumatic for me, because I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the thick enough skin, if you will, to handle, to be able to get into those conversations and just be okay with it. So it is definitely a learned skill in there. And that's why, as I started off with, that's why we have both Horizon Worlds and big screen. If you're brand new to VR, I might not just drop you straight into big screen. I might recommend, hey, let's go to Horizon Worlds first. But that skill set that you can grow and expand. And now when people come up to me in real life and they say, hey, I got a question for you. And, it's nowhere near as intimidating as it used to be,
Yeah, for sure. I just think of in every offense that Pharisees had with Jesus, it was he's hanging out with drunkards, he's hanging out with prostitutes, he's hanging out with scummy, sleazy people. Most of the time, probably even for them, they were maybe even more along on a spiritual journey than maybe some of the people that we run across in VR, right? Because that was their context. They grew up learning the Torah. They grew up knowing that there was this coming Messiah and there was a God who was for them and not against them. They grew up learning that kind of stuff. And yet in VR, we hop into environments where most people, they're not educated to that. And so for me, the shift was, and I've also had conversations with other church leaders about this. It's just look, I wouldn't take the person at your church who's going to be easily offended with a couple of cuss words or, gross gestures or anything like that, because they're going to be offended. It's just how it's going to be. And then I've followed that up with, but what do you expect out of a place that the name of Jesus is foreign? You have to expect that if you're going to launch any kind of ministry within those spaces, that you're going to hear the things that in in real life church buildings going to make you go, oh, you can't say that. You can't do that. And so I actually grew up under a senior pastor that when they went from a portable church into their building, people started saying like, well, now you're going to have all these youth that are going to come in and they're going to destroy your bathrooms and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. And he's just like, but at least they're coming to church. Mm-hmm. He's like, we have a facilities person. We have a facilities team to fix these things in order to reach the kids that are going to be hard to reach. And yes, they're going to destroy things, but they're also going to hear about Jesus at the same time. And so I've taken that pretty much same mentality into VR going, yeah, I'm probably going to get cussed out tonight. Mm-hmm. Yep, somebody's probably going to say something that is very offensive to me. Mm-hmm. Yep, somebody's probably going to say something that is very coarse. But at the same time, it might be the very first time that they've ever heard that there is a God who is for them and not against them.
Amen.
And so
Amen.
That's why I'm saying, and that's why, like, when you and I first started talking about this in VR a couple of weeks ago, I was like, dude, I got to get Nathan back on this podcast because he's experiencing what I'm experiencing. That yes, there is an evangelistic aspect to VR, and pretty much it's 100% what it is. It's all evangelistic. But it's not just evangelistic in the sense of the opportunity for the church to reach the lost out in the world in VR spaces, but I've started to see that it's an evangelistic tool for the local church to raise the evangelistic temperature within their individuals, within their church. That's going to end up having a local impact, which is what we all really want to see. We want to see our geographical locations reach for the gospel. So, yeah, man, when I heard that you guys were seeing the same thing, I was like, Nathan, you got to come on and talk about this. So, hey, man, as we bring this podcast to a close, well, go ahead.
Got one quick kind of thought to that.
Yeah.
Years ago, I got to listen to Francis Chan, and a great speaker. And one thing that I took away from that is that God doesn't want wimpy Christians. And, that's been a mantra, a motivator for me for years now. And when you're in VR, I'm going to tell you, it takes guts. It takes guts. And you've probably seen that. And so, the wimpy Christians they're going to either grow or they're going to say, hey, this isn't for me. But yeah.
Yeah, which is fine, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of, you're getting put, your iron getting put into the fire, and you're going to be refined from it.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, Nathan, as we bring this episode to a close, again, the whole focus on this season is why churches should be pressing further in to VR technology and why they should be adopting it as part of what they do and who they are. So they've just heard you talk about the evangelistic side that you guys are seeing at FRVR. But, dude, just give us one good reason why the church should not abandon the idea of VR technology, but should be adopting it and pressing into it in 2024.
There are still millions of people that are using VR. There are. Okay, so if we went from 300,000 or 300 million, whatever it is, went from, we dropped down about 20%. Okay, but there are still millions of people in VR. I was in VR chat, and I know we haven't talked about VR chat, talking with Stuart from Cornerstone there, and he gave out the stat that of the people that are in VR, they're in there very often because they're lonely. And those lonely people have they need to know who Jesus Christ is. They need to know that he's there as their Savior. And even if you had only 300,000 people in VR, think of that. Think of a city of 300,000 people. And there's we can probably count the number of churches on one hand, we need to be in there. That's like a city of 300,000 people with only, 4 or 5, maybe 10 churches. So,
yeah, that's a good word, man. And we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Nathan, for coming back onto the Metaverse Church podcast. If you want to follow Nathan and what they're doing over at FRVR at all, we'll have some links down here in the show notes. So be sure to share, subscribe, rate, and review. We'll have another new episode for you next month, unless there's a bonus one. This is a reason why you got to subscribe. Sometimes there'll be bonus ones that pop out. But until then, we'll see you next time for another episode of the Metaverse Church podcast. Until then, be blessed.